disturbing police horror story. Good evening, everyone. If you're listening to this, turn down the lights, make yourself comfortable, and prepare to hear a story that will stay with you long after it's over. What you're about to hear is not just a short tale, it's an extended account, told in detail, of one night where fear stretched on endlessly, and the people we rely on the most, the police, could do nothing to protect us. It was a cold October night in a small, suburban town tucked between forest and farmland. The streets were quiet, houses lined up neatly along a cul-de-sac, and the kind of silence hung in the air that only happens when most families are asleep. Sarah, a 27-year-old schoolteacher, had just returned home from grading papers late at her friend's place. She pulled into her driveway around 11:40 p.m., headlights sweeping across the neatly trimmed hedges in front of her one-story house. Everything looked perfectly normal, at least on the surface. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been watched on her drive home. When she stepped out of her car, keys in hand, she felt the weight of the night pressing in. She lived alone ever since her fiancé had moved overseas for work. Normally, she felt safe. Her neighborhood wasn't dangerous, and besides, she knew most of her neighbors. But that night, as she walked up her front steps, she could swear she heard movement. It was subtle, almost like footsteps, the crunch of gravel shifting in rhythm with her own. She froze, looking back. Nothing, just her car cooling down, ticking in the silence. She brushed it off, unlocked the door, and slipped inside. Inside, the house greeted her with the usual warmth, familiar furniture, a faint lavender candle scent lingering from earlier. She placed her bag on the table, but the unease wouldn't let go. For a moment she stood there listening. The refrigerator hummed, pipes shifted, and then tap, a sound against the window. Her heart jumped. She pulled back the curtain slightly and scanned the yard. Again, nothing. Trying to steady herself, she made some tea, sat at the kitchen counter, and opened her laptop. If she distracted herself, maybe the fear would fade. But 15 minutes later, just as she was starting to relax, came another sound, this time from the side of the house. Not a tap, a scrape, like something rough dragging across the siding. Sarah's first instinct was to call the police. She dialed non-emergency, explaining in a shaky voice that she thought someone might be outside her house. The dispatcher was calm. "Ma'am, stay inside. We'll send a unit to patrol the area. Keep your doors locked." She agreed, hung up, and waited. 5 minutes later, headlights washed briefly across her street. A police cruiser slowed near her house, paused, then kept going. That was it. No knock on the door, no officer checking the yard. Sarah tried to convince herself she was safe, but deep down she knew she wasn't. An hour passed. Midnight bled into 1 a.m. Sarah had moved to the living room couch with a blanket, leaving a lamp on for comfort. Her tea sat cold on the table beside her. Just when her eyelids were beginning to droop, she heard it again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps on the gravel driveway, this time unmistakable. She sat upright, heart hammering in her chest. From the couch, she could see the faint outline of someone moving outside. Not clearly, just a shadow passing under the streetlight across her lawn. She held her breath, and then the shadow stopped. Whoever it was stood there, perfectly still, just outside the edge of the light, watching her house. Sarah grabbed her phone and called 911 again. Her voice trembled as she whispered to the operator, "He's here. There's someone outside my house just standing there." The operator kept her calm, assuring her help was on the way. But Sarah could see for herself. Her house was at the far end of the neighborhood. It would take time for a unit to circle back. Minutes dragged like hours. The figure didn't move. It just stood, facing the house. Then, in one sickening motion, the shadow stepped closer, out of the dark and into the glow of the streetlight. A man, tall, wearing a hood pulled low, his hands shoved into his pockets. He craned his head, staring directly at her window. Sarah ducked out of sight, pressing herself against the wall. She tried to stay quiet, praying he hadn't seen her. But before she could even think of her next move, bang! A heavy thud rattled her front door. He was trying the handle. Her blood ran cold. She ran to the kitchen, clutching the biggest knife she could find, and pressed her back against the counter. Another bang, louder, more forceful. The dispatcher's voice in her ear told her to stay calm, that officers were almost there. But she knew. He wasn't just testing the door. He was going to get in. When the police finally arrived, sirens cutting through the silence, the pounding stopped. By the time officers rushed to the door and shone their flashlights around, the man was gone. They searched the yard, the street, even the tree line at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Nothing, not a trace. One officer suggested it might have been a prank. Another said maybe it was just a neighbor passing by. They wrote up a report, told Sarah to call if it happened again, and left. Her house felt emptier than ever when their taillights disappeared down the street. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat awake until the sun came up, every creak of the house sending shivers down her spine. And when morning finally came, she gathered the courage to step outside. That's when she saw them, footprints, deep, heavy impressions in the dew-soaked grass circling her house. Not just on the driveway, not just by the front door. They went all the way around, past her bedroom window, past the back patio. He had been watching from every angle, waiting. And the worst part? The police never found him. To this day, Sarah lives with her curtains drawn, locks double-checked, and lights left burning through the night. Because sometimes when you're alone in the dark, the scariest part isn't the noise outside your window. It's the silence after.